Hello, I'm Robert Bragan, and this is my research video presentation for COMS550. The topic of this presentation is the communication needs of the non-traditional student. The non-traditional student has been identified as that student or students that are age 25 and above. However one categorizes the non-traditional student, it must be recognized that they do have unique characteristics. They have different goals, different desires, different motivations than the traditional student. And teachers, college administrators should be careful to understand these differences and to take action to meet these needs. First of all, we must understand exactly who the non-traditional student is. As I stated before, the age of 25 seems to be the line of inclusion into this category. However, when you're trying to define a non-traditional student, it seems that age is not quite satisfying, because if we really have to pin it down, what is the difference between a student 23 years old and a student 26 years old? So the age does not seem to satisfy us as a definition of non-traditional. A couple different ideas have been presented, such as contextual age as compared to chronological age. Contextual age takes into consideration the life events of the person. Perhaps they've experienced more in a short time than others have in a longer life. And so contextual age helps us to understand who may be the non-traditional student. Also, it has been put forth by Jenkins, 2009. He suggests that non-traditional students may be younger in some cases and traditional students may be older in some cases. And he says this because he believes that life-changing events may be what differentiates the non-traditional student from the traditional student. So what is a life-changing event? He defines a life-changing event as that event which actually changes the student's attitude and mindset. And by mindset, he refers to how the student looks at education, how the student values education. So according to Jenkins, something has happened in the life of this student that has caused them to value education more highly. And then there's another means. The National Center for Educational Statistics also has a different way of defining the non-traditional student based on certain factors such as enrollment patterns, which would be less than full-time, financial and family status, those students that are financially independent from their parents, perhaps have more dependents than just a spouse, and also their high school graduation status, which usually indicates the student did not receive a traditional academic diploma from high school, but rather most likely completed a GED. So the definition of a non-traditional student is somewhat complicated, but generally speaking, the rest of this presentation is going to be built on the definition of a student 25 years of age or older, but also those that have experienced significant life events that does alter their attitude and the value which they place on education. How many non-traditional students are in the college classroom? Statistics reveal in the last few years that non-traditional students account for 43% of the population of colleges in our nation. So now that we know who the non-traditional student is, what are their characteristics? What's different about them? Research has shown us a couple different things I think that are very important that we should understand. First of all, their motivation is different. They're intrinsically motivated. Not so much motivated by grades, even though their grades are usually higher. That's not what drives them. It is that the idea of growth. It is the idea of succeeding. So it comes from within. So what does that mean? Well, one of the things that means is if you want to really motivate a non-traditional student, perhaps don't focus on their grades. Don't remind them, okay, do well so that you can get a good grade. Find ways to make the content relevant to their goals and to their desires, and that will go a long way in motivating them. Non-traditional students have also been found to exhibit a greater sense of hopefulness that's tied to their unique situation, according to Brinthorpe and Edie, 2014. Non-traditional students value their learning and school-related opportunities more highly than do traditional students. So what does that mean? It means that they place great value or greater value than do traditional students on their experience. So let the experience be very important when you work with a non-traditional student. It's important to recognize that many older students may have certain physical needs, such as vision or hearing impairment. Perhaps cognitive processing is slower than the younger traditional student. All of this should be taken into consideration when working with a non-traditional student. Slower reaction times, slower processing speeds, it's part of the non-traditional student. So we know who the non-traditional students are. We understand some of their characteristics, how they're different. But what are teachers and administrators, what are they supposed to do with the differences? Do we treat the non-traditional student differently than the traditional student? Research says the answer to that question is yes. Wyatt, 2011, asserts unless college and university development personnel can effectively address and understand developmental issues of all college students, they will continue to base the needs, issues, and characteristics of non-traditional students on that of traditional college students. In other words, a non-traditional student will be treated as if they were a traditional student. And so their goals, their needs, their motivations will go unrecognized. One of the most repeated suggestions for colleges to improve the educational opportunity of non-traditional students is to create flexible programs that help the non-traditional student because of their schedule, because of their family responsibilities, that will help them to be successful in their college work. There are 7 suggestions that I believe are helpful for teachers in the classroom to implement in working with non-traditional students. First of all, recognize that non-traditional students are intrinsically motivated. Again, relate the material to the goals of the student. Relate it to their personal growth, and this will increase their motivation. Secondly, recognize the increased need for clarity in instruction and in expectation. They may not hear it as well. Be very clear in communicating. Thirdly, teachers should be sensitive to the slower recall speed and processing speed of the older non-traditional student. If the student raises their hand to answer or to respond in class to a question, know that it may take a little bit longer. Be patient. Fourthly, teachers should understand that non-traditional students do not respond well to authoritarian type of teacher in the classroom. They like to be part of the conversation. They like to share. They like to be part of that collaborative learning experience. Fifthly, non-traditional students may have a steeper learning curve with technology. Remember on assignments with non-traditional students, take time to ask them, do you know how to use the software? Do you need help? Perhaps the college offers tutorials or refresher courses that would benefit the non-traditional student in this area. Sixthly, teachers should realize that older students place a higher level of importance on everyday events. The conversation after class, the cup of coffee in the snack shop. Non-traditional students look at this as learning events. And finally, teachers should consider the use of more recognition-based assessment, multiple choice, true, false, even the inclusion of essay questions really benefit the non-traditional student. Instead of being so loaded with tests, consider projects and papers as the non-traditional student responds well to this. Finally, how do we look at this from the Christian perspective? Well, we first of all must remember that Jesus met people, He met their needs where they were. He met the need that they had. And so we must understand in working with a non-traditional student, their needs are different, their goals are different, their motivation is different. Let's meet them where they are. As Christians, we understand the fact that God meets the needs of our lives every day. But He meets our needs, not our neighbor's needs, not our spouse's needs. He meets our needs. I think this will help us work better and communicate better with a non-traditional student. Thank you.